Hey guys, and girls, and well, that's it, because there's only two genders. Why am I wearing a bandana, you ask? It's a good question. Because I have a headache, and positive pressure helps palliate the headache. Why is it pink? I couldn't find my black one. Anyways, how many of you heard of the Roaring Twenties? Obviously, the time period was in the 1920s, and the name was titled that due to economic prosperity that was happening in the nation. Now, the 20s followed the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, and they preceded the Great Depression. Woodrow Wilson, at times during his presidential term, had unemployment rates up around 20%. Inflation skyrocketed. The highest income tax was over 70%. When he left office, well, first let's go back. A big reason why, when he left office, the unemployment rate was around 11% because World War I ended and all the war heroes came back and they could not find jobs. So, Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge came into the presidency, and what they did with their policies created the biggest economic boom in the 20th century by far. We all know that FDR and Woodrow Wilson are the closest things to socialists that this country has ever known. In fact, this country, they essentially were socialists. They used a socialist agenda to implement policy that they thought was good. It wasn't good, though. Woodrow Wilson instituted the income tax, the federal income tax. Woodrow Wilson instituted the Federal Reserve. All of these policies that he incorporated into his presidency did nothing but harm the economy. They harmed inflation, they harmed unemployment, they harmed everything. So when Republicans, Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge, were elected immediately after Wilson, they did something unheard of. They did something that has not been done since. And what it created was called the Roaring Twenties, a time of the biggest economic prosperity in the 20th century. Ronald Reagan looks at Calvin Coolidge as his favorite president. And Ronald Reagan actually followed in the path of Calvin Coolidge to some degree. But there are a couple of things that he did not do that Harding and Calvin Coolidge did, which would have made Reagan balance the budget. But first, here's what they did when they got into office. The first 2 years, they did nothing but cut spending. They kept taxes the same. Income tax, highest bracket was around over 70%, I think 74%. But they cut spending the first year by 65%. Now, in contrast, we currently don't cut spending 1%. 1% we don't ever cut spending that much. They did 65% their first year. Their second year, they did an extra 50%. It went from, I think, 18 billion and some change to 6 billion to 3 billion. Then they dropped taxes exponentially from the highest bracket of 74% down to 25%. And what that did, that incentivized companies to expand, and that put more money in the pockets of consumers. You have more money, you spend more money. Unemployment dropped from over 11% to below 3%, just from doing that simple tactic. And it's genius, and this is what we should do. But the Democratic motto is that you have to spend money to get out of recession. That's what Joe Biden said in 2008, 2007, around that time. Another common myth is that you have to spend money to make money. And although that can be true to some degree, it was not true with the Roaring Twenties. By cutting spending, we actually created, not we, but Harding and Coolidge created economic prosperity that was not seen at all, especially by the previous administration, Woodrow Wilson, who also, this guy was a bad guy. He put Germans in internment camps. This is decades before World War II. I mean, he was socialist, he was a racist, he instituted the KKK. I mean, this guy was not a good president. And FDR is really no better, but both of them are looked on with deference. Both of them are looked on as heroes of the Union, and they did something unprecedented, and that, by default, makes them great. And that is an abysmal attitude to have. Just because you do something unprecedented does not mean you are great because you do it. There is an argument now with Susan Rice. A lot of people want to say that, well, what she did wasn't illegal and therefore it wasn't bad. Well, how about this one? The president can issue presidential pardons. That he's legally can do that. What if all of a sudden Trump started pardoning every single terrorist and every single murderer he could? Legally, that's fine. But ethically and morally, that is wrong. And that is the same concept with Susan Rice. She may have not done anything illegal by unmasking the names, but by doing it, she created a firestorm that caused detrimental consequences. But back to the Roaring Twenties now. Ronald Reagan looked at Calvin Coolidge as his hero, favorite president, specifically because of what Calvin Coolidge created in the Roaring Twenties. So what Reagan did was something similar. He brought down the highest tax bracket, which was Jimmy Carter's, over 70% again. He brought that down to 25%. He had two brackets, 25% and 14%, I want to say. 14 or 10, one of the two. And he had high GDP growth. He had amazing GDP growth, some quarters up to 8% growth. However, the deficit and the debt did get out of hand because he increased military spending exponentially. And that's what caused the high deficit. So although there was economic prosperity in terms of jobs, the juxtaposition between the increase of jobs and the debt were directly proportional instead of the other way around. Now, if he would have kept the taxes the same, which I understand why he lowered them, because let's face it, over 75% for the highest income tax is just clinically insane. It doesn't make any sense. If you have to spend more than 3/4 of your money in taxes, you're not going to use that money on consumer products. You're not going to use that money to expand your businesses. It's that simple. So I understood why he did it, but I don't think he should have did such a drastic cut so soon. He should have drastically cut spending and not increase spending like he did. Now, if he would have done that, waited a little bit, couple of years, and then dropped taxes, he would have had the same paradigm shift as Calvin Coolidge did. And you would see that economic prosperity, GDP growth would go up, and the debt and deficit would go down. But since he expanded crazily on military spending, that's why that he had a great economy, but the deficit and the debt still increased. Now people say, well, yeah, but Bill Clinton, he had higher GDP growth. He created more jobs than Reagan. Look what he did. Yeah, that's true, but what they don't want to tell you is that Bill Clinton was president during the boom of the internet. So multi-billions of dollars were being incorporated into the economy due to jobs and things affiliated with that of the internet. And the boom of the internet expanded everything, created exponential wealth like crazy. You could have someone like Obama or even George W. Bush being president at that time and still achieve economic prosperity simply because the way the world was at that time. So yes, Bill Clinton did hell of a job as president. He was corrupt as hell, but he did hell of a job, and Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House, and the two worked well together. The two were able to balance the budget. That being said, though, if it wasn't during the 90s, if he was president in the 2000s, it would not be the same as it was. And I'm done.